Il tema delle migrazioni ha...
The issue of migration has been very present during the first 2 days. In the words of speakers, it has been present in what was said by representatives of corporations, governments from the northern shores of the Mediterranean and the south, thereby projecting the central nature of this theme in our discussion. And in our discussion, it is very much present in electoral campaigns underway in various European countries, and also in what is said by many mayors, many governors in countries on the northern shores and southern shores of the Mediterranean. Now, this session is dedicated to that specific point, managing migration together. And we're going to now hear the voices of international organizations. We have the High Commission of Refugees from the UN, Filippo Grandi, and then ministers from countries that are either transit countries or origin countries or destination countries, or all three, in order to have an overall view of this phenomenon, which needs a global view. Filippo Grandi has accepted to replace what was supposed to be the speaker with an exchange of comments and a few questions that will enable us to properly home in on the phenomenon before we get into what the individual ministers will say. Filippo, in Europe, we've moved over the last few years in practically trying to do everything. First, we saved search and rescue operations, and then reception, and then closing the doors. Initial phase, talking about managing an emergency, and recently there has been an effort to move on to a long-term approach, a compact, etc. Now, the point is, the first question, could you give us a view from the United Nations? What is the view from the UN about this? A view from the United Nations, an organization that has to take a close look at the 22 million refugees in the world, and not just the ones of such concern to Europe, European governments and Europeans. 65 million, if you calculate those who are internally displaced persons. So it's a phenomenon which is expanding more and more. Now, in my mind, there is one fundamental way to answer your question. Europe, but in effect not just Europe, but the international community must, I should say, take a quality leap, but a change in approach when dealing with the issue of forced migration, because that's what we're talking about, basically. Now, the change in approach means that we shouldn't keep on considering these answers as one by one. That is, reception in Europe, one. Help them where they live, in the countries of origin, the major countries of origin, or the countries have a lot of refugees. A country which hosts refugees are countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Pakistan, Jordan. 90% of the refugees of the world are in those countries. So we shouldn't just think about the transit countries or the issues, the very complicated issue of Libya. We have to work on all levels. We have to step in regarding situations of the internally displaced persons or refugees, or victims of domestic conflict, all the way to reception into developed countries, rich countries. Now, what we do has to be done at all levels and in a parallel manner. Only in this way could we give a well-structured and complete response to this issue. You cannot just focus on one point. Unfortunately, these crises lead us to respond in a one-by-one way. And this is the invitation that my organization, the High Commission of Refugees, made to the world. Last year, to President Juncker, we gave him a document which is called Europe and Refugees, where we asked Europe to strategically structure and articulate its activities, its response to the global crisis of refugees on all levels, from political endeavors to put an end to conflicts, armed conflicts, all the way to a real reform of the system of exile in Europe, or the system of asylum in Europe, with better justice and better effectiveness. Now, taking a look at this piece-by-piece approach, what are the weak links? What concerns you the most in these various links? Resistance, contradiction, vis-a-vis the question I'll ask you a moment about the global compact being worked on by the UN. Well, there are a number of weak links. One of these weak links is the national response instead of a collective international response. We see this as regards asylum in Europe. We also see it very often in development endeavors, which are carried out country by country and not in a strategic manner, really focusing on the stabilization of flows of persons. Now, we also think that it will be necessary to take a quality leap in response to this. Traditionally, for many years, I've been working for 30 years with refugees, this was considered a humanitarian problem, for which it sufficed to come up with humanitarian responses. It had limited resources, short-term response, and a short-term reply. Limited investment in education, employment, etc., and very little support to the communities that host the refugees. We have to go beyond that, obviously. The phenomenon has expanded so much and has really grown that we really have to have real answers. And these answers, have to involve organizations and the countries that are development-oriented. Now, we already started with the World Bank that has allocated a fund of $2 billion to that end. We've begun to help about 15 countries that host a large number of refugees in order to take this quality leap in the response for those countries. So investments in schools, in refugee centers, etc. But the weakest point is activities undertaken in the countries in which the refugees come. The organizations of the World Bank, a large bilateral office, find it difficult to do anything in fragile countries where the state as an institution is not always a consistent, solid partner. But that's where we have to start working. That's where we have to invent new instruments, new tools, so we can stabilize those people where they are before their departure, their exile from their home country becomes important. I'm not going to talk about instruments for countries of origin, but can we come up with these instruments? I mean, Europe, Africa has for decades been the main destination of assistance. Do we have the conceptual instruments to take a second move in development? Second, do we have the money, the funds to promote this program in countries of origin? People talk about a lot of different figures, 40 billion from Europe, then two components, 4 or 5 billion in funds that should reach these countries, and then you've got to the port of the funds for investments, which is something else, which worked in Europe after the war, but may not work in Africa. So how do you see the how do you consider the credibility of all this, the presentation of these two lines, that is to have the instruments and have the resources to implement them? I think we have to try. You have to experiment and see if they work or not. Humanitarian organizations have worked in countries in the throes of war for a long time and have been able to do so, but their ability to mobilize resources is limited. In countries like Somalia or Afghanistan, where the situation is very, very fragile, but where it is possible in some areas to do something concrete, I think we have to try it out. For a long time, people thought, well, this is impossible. That is, to invest more and more and more money to support refugees in countries which have a lot of refugees. Well, we said, There are humanitarian funds, full stop. Now, that has been proven false. There is no limit. We had imposed this limit upon ourselves. These funds, we now have these funds there. People are allocated with important effects. Take a look at what's happening in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in countries, in the poorer countries. But well along the way to development. I think we have to try to do it in fragile countries, precisely in order to help people to go through this phase of frailness without, unless they're in physical danger, obviously. Well, then they have to be accompanied and protect them where they seek refuge. But I think this is an important direction to explore, and we are certain we are ready to do so. We've started working with some institutions on this, but now it's a question now of small projects. We have to continue. Could I just add one point? Let me go back to my point of departure here. This cannot be done only in countries of origin, because peoples will continue to flee from those countries. We have to continue helping the countries of asylum, the countries of transit, because more and more the movements extend regionally through various countries, and have to continue. I'm speaking to Europe. We have to maintain the reception and asylum systems which do work, because one of these things does not in any way exclude the others. Now, Libya is a transit country, but for many people, it's also become a country of destination or detention. If we wanted to take the image that recently hit people in the papers, what is an agency like yours doing to? What is an institution such as yours doing to monitor and to avoid situations like we now have in Libya? And Chrono made this announcement to relocate these people from 400 to 700,000 people, all in Europe, and none of us obviously wants that to happen. But since we do live in difficulty redistributing 40,000 people a year inside Italy, how could we solve the problem of 400,000 to 700,000 people who are trapped in Libya? That's quite a shock. What could this mean? Well, the first thing we have to do in Libya, quite obviously, we all know very well, is to have access to these people, those people who are in difficulty, who are subject to abusive behavior, crimes, violence. We've all seen what happens, slavery, and especially in those areas that are not controlled by the Libyan authorities, but are controlled by tribal militias that keep an eye on movement and the existence of immigrants and refugees, both categories. So have access, that's very complicated, but we're working on that. And this access is now expanding. It's limited, still limited, but it's getting better. Once we have had that access to those people, we have to take a look at each case. The most vulnerable among refugees have to be evacuated, and they have to be offered other opportunities of resettlement in other countries. We had one first experiment. We evacuated 25 people a few weeks ago to Niger. Niger said, fine. As a point of transit, these 25 people will then be resettled in France. We're also working on another about 150 persons, of whom 50 children. They're very small numbers, fine, but you have to start somewhere. And then you've got the whole issue of the economic migrants, who are the majority of those people blocked in Libya, in many of whom know very well wanted to go home, go back home. And for them, there is a voluntary return program managed by the IMO, International Migration Organization. There's a program of the European Union, African Union, the UN, which foresees or contemplates an increase in these voluntary returns to one's home country. And for thousands of people, that could solve this problem of feeling like they're in a trap and aren't a trap. So to begin with access, identify the cases, and then offer those people solutions according to what is the nature of their situation. Now, just one comment on the Global Compact. I know you're working on refugees. Will the Global Compact bring anything new?
The Global Compact, well, actually will be two compacts, one for refugees and one for migrations. These are two compacts decided by the UN General Assembly in New York last year at the Summit on Migrants and Refugees. The UNHCR is in charge of preparing the Global Compact on refugees. The Global Compact is not about reinventing refugee protection. Everything is already enshrined in the Geneva Convention and regional conventions, such as the one of the Organization for African Unity in 1969. So there is a framework, it's precise, it has principles, and they need to be changed. But the Global Compact has the purpose of extending the coalition, an alliance of players who deal with refugees. Conventionally, the response was humanitarian and with scanty resources, but in many countries we need to find other partners. This forum actually is dedicated to new partnerships, and one of those is the one that we want to set up around this convention and compact. The World Bank, regional banks, we want the involvement of cooperation agencies dealing with the refugee crisis, involving the private sector as well. We have very interesting experiments in Ethiopia, for instance, with the IKEA Foundation, and many African countries and schools like the Vodafone Foundation. So there's tremendous interest on the part of so many other players in taking part with new resources, new approaches to provide a response to the refugee crisis. And I hope the compact, the Global Compact, may serve as a model, as a point of reference for these new partnerships. Thank you very much, Filippo Grandi, and success to you in your work.
Ministro MESSAHEL, Excellency.
Minister Marcel, Your Excellency, during the last decade, your country, Algeria, has gone from being a country of origin for migrants to a country of transit for migrants, and more a country of destination for migrants. And so all the points raised so clearly by Filippo Grandi are part of your experience in Algeria. So a country such as yours, with your experience, how can your country contribute to our debate, to seeking a solution? We need solutions, and we've talked about these so far. Well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure for me to be here and to represent my country. Yes, my country has been a country of origin, of transit, and of destination. It's a circle. So we've been a country of origin, transit, and destination. But now the context has changed. And on the 9th of December, we shall be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Lisbon Summit. The Lisbon Summit, which focused on migration and population. Mr. Grandi spoke about the UN experience. He has succeeded Mr. Gutierrez, who is a former Prime Minister of Portugal. Now, we're faced with the very same problem. We're talking about refugees today. We're talking about migration. And I would say that Africa today is the continent that sends out the largest number of people, over 20 million. So we need to go back to the spirit of Lisbon and go back to the causes. And we just cannot deal with migration on a daily basis or on the basis of an agenda. We need to address the underlying causes. So the Lisbon summit was held 10 years, and we were dealing with the dimension of migrations. Now we're dealing with migrations and security, something that didn't exist then. Human trafficking, terrorism, etc. That didn't exist back then. And the effort now needs to focus on the causes, to regulate conflicts. There are conflicts in Libya or Mali or elsewhere, and there are causes along the migration routes. We have the know-how, the capacity to do this. If we all have the same agenda, if the UN play their role, if the African Union does as well, then we shall be able to try and solve the conflict issue, because it is the very source of the displacement of people. We heard about aid to development. Well, I know something about that. Africa doesn't need aid to development. Africa needs development. Africa needs to become industrialized. I've been involved in development for about 10 years. When we started the dialogue and the G8 and the NEPAD, well, we asked ourselves, how can we promote development? Well, Euro-developed countries, you can earmark $10,000 for ODA. And if they go to studies, and $300 go to the experts of it, per diems of experts, and then you have very little trickling down to those in need. Africa is a young continent, an emerging continent. It has extraordinary resources, and it needs to be supported in its development effort. And it's a win-win situation. If you see people leaving their country, well, if you don't if you don't want migrants, you need to pave the way for development. You need to pave the way for security. Africa is a wonderful continent. We know what is happening in Niger. It's dramatic. And it's huge, and it's covered by a desert. Once there were tourist guides who helped people discover the beauty of nature. Today, the circumstances are such that many of them have become traffickers. The tourist guides who had a noble job, who helped people discover 2,000-year-old history and heritage, are now traffickers. So we need to go back to the causes. There's a direct link between organized crime and terrorism, and we see this every day. I'm speaking about my region, the Sahel. There's no difference between a terrorist who calls himself a jihadist and a trafficker who smuggles people or hashish or drugs. It's just the same people. They're jihadis in the evening, in the morning they're smugglers and traffickers, and they get rich. About $1 billion in returns for trafficking. And this fuels organized crime, funds organized crime and terrorism. We have kilometers of borders with Libya, and the images we saw these past few days are dramatic. We have slave mongers still. It's a chaos. There's total absence of the state. How can we deploy people from the UNHCR to help those people. But there's no organized state. Well, if that state existed, if there was a state that was strong and fair, all this would never have happened. It's an absence of a solution, of a strong fabric, of a national army, of institutions. And that's where terrorism develops. That's a hotbed for terrorism. You can really deploy all your efforts to securitize the Mediterranean, but you'll fail. And if you want to fight, and if you want to go back to the noble migration, such as those of Italy, for instance, in the past, migration is added value. It's part of development. You don't only have illegal migration from Africa. You have legal migrants as well to France, elsewhere as well. And we heard what Mrs. Merkel said. She spoke about the need for youth in Europe. But our continent is young. So, yes, Algeria has become a country of destination, but alone it cannot bear this burden, the weight of being the policeman of the continent. We have people who live in terrible conditions. So we need to think about a global strategy that goes to the heart of the problem and that gives prospects of future to these people. Ibrahim is there. Now, do you know what a desert is? It's almost impassable, yet women and children cross that wilderness, and these people are being trafficked, and there's a whole organization behind that. Now, we need an action plan of the UN, and a commitment is required. But the commitments are there, so they need to be implemented. And the security issue is a central one. It's fighting against terrorism, against organized crime. And in Syria and Iraq, ISIS has been defeated. But what will its new destination be? Europe is trying to securitize its space. Do you know where terrorists are in the region? It's 100 million square meters. They're present there. There are terrorist groups in Libya, terrorist groups in Mali. My friend Ibrahim knows. In Boko Haram, a disastrous situation in Libya. So we need to think about all these matters if we want to solve the problem. We'll always say we'll find a solution. We'll receive quotas, 100,000 persons. But we had these flows from Syria and Turkey and Afghanistan. But had we solved the problem of Iraq or Syria, the situation would be quite different. Thank you.
Grazie Ministro, e parto proprio.
Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to Minister JHINAOUI, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Minister MESSAHEL of Algeria, you talked about the next destination of terrorists as a major concern. And this is one of the concerns that Tunisia has at this moment in time. But taking a look at the data regarding migration flow over the last few months, which see a sharp decline in Libya and a strong increase from Tunisia, it would seem that Tunisia could be one of the next destinations of the flow of migrants. Mr. Minister, just how strong is that concern? Is your country concerned about that? Now, you came from the bilateral talks, and you came in at a moment when we were talking about the need for a global plan that would involve numerous countries and more phases in implementation. What contribution could a country like Tunisia make to this endeavor? Thank you very much. You have the floor, Mr.
Let me first start by congratulating you personally for the success of this great event. I think Med-Dialogue is becoming more and more one of the biggest regional brainstorming meeting among prominent people coming from all over the world. So congratulations. I would like to start by basic remarks. First of all, migration, it is not a new phenomenon. If you study history, you will see that there are nations who were just built by migrants. I don't like to mention them, you know all of them. So this is not a new phenomenon. It is not a challenge. It's a challenge today how to manage migration. But as a phenomenon, it is not, we don't consider it as a challenge. We consider it as an opportunity. Because if you study, and I think all of what I'm going to say has been said by Minister MESSAHEL, I think there is a common need, a need from the country of origin to who have an excess, or who have people who are looking for a better life. That does not mean that those people, some of them, they have good, level of schooling. In Tunisia, we have around 250,000 people with master's degrees looking for jobs. Just last week, I learned that there are 15,000 engineers in telecom in Tunisia looking for jobs. I am sure that Europe today needs such kind of human resources. But instead of trying to find a common way of solving this problem, we are just pushing away those who are willing to, consider, and they are paying for their lives, better life in Europe. So I think we have to change the way we are looking to this phenomena. First of all, in Africa. Africa, of course, needs, and we just came back from Abidjan, where we had a very important meeting, European African Summit. Africa today is the focus of the international community. It is the focus because many African countries, they are witnessing the highest level of growth because it's a land of opportunity. So the Chinese, the Korean, the Indian, the Turkish, everybody is looking to Africa. But Africa needs, as was said by Minister MESSAHEL, needs capacity building. It needs, there are many countries which are becoming slowly, unfortunately, failed state countries. So they need support to develop their institutions. And here, Europe, which has accumulated experience for a number of centuries now, or years, I think can lend such support to these countries. Africa needs partnership and investment, not just to go and look for resources. To be, let me tell you frankly, speak frankly on this. It needs partnership, win-win partnership. And just taking the case of Tunisia, 2011, we had a revolution. We were not able, for a number of months, to control our borders because the state almost disappeared. So 22,000 people migrated in a few days to Lampedusa. Lampedusa with a population of 5,000 people. So they just put the flag of Tunisia on the Lampedusa, thinking that it became a Tunisian land. But just few months later, or a few years later, when the Tunisian state regained, its strength, we were able to control our border. And today we receive more Tunisians willing to go back to Tunisia than sending Tunisians to Italy or to any other European countries. So it shows to you that if we are able, to have the right institution to control our border and to deal with foreign partners, we will prevent such kind of massive immigration coming from Africa. In Libya, unfortunately today, is living the worst experience of any country in the world, because there was a system in 2011 which was hit and destroyed. That system was bad or was good. It has its quality, but it has also its negative points. But unfortunately, it was a hit-and-run policy. Nobody cared about Libya, of helping the Libyan, getting out of their differences and building a new state in Libya. It happens today that instead of having a government, a full, effective, running government, we have a failed state. So most of these migrants coming from sub-Saharan Africa, they are crossing Libya for a simple reason, because there is no border and control either in south of Libya or from the Libyan shores to Italy. So it shows that there is a need, a responsibility of international community to help Libya, for example, getting back, to the negotiations with the Libyan and settling their difference to reach a peaceful agreement. Now, getting back to your question regarding foreign fighters and people who are involved in terrorism getting back to Tunisia, we are very much aware. First of all, let me tell you that the numbers which are mentioned by the media about the number of Tunisians being involved in these kind of trouble spots or in Syria or in Iraq, they are very much exaggerated. Nobody, who whatsoever was able to count all these people, involved in this kind of crisis. But we have a few hundreds of them coming from Tunisia. Of course, we are building a new democratic state. We are dealing, these people, they are coming back. We are dealing with them, in a very open process. They are received, taken to custody, interrogated. If found guilty, then they go to justice. And we know exactly who they are. And we are controlling them and trying, to find the right way how to fight this kind of radicalism or this kind of hatred, and speeches and rejecting the others. It's very important that we craft the tools, the right tools, not just to stop those foreign fighters coming back to Tunisia or to any other country, but also to prevent new ones joining, these kind of trouble spots. And unfortunately, Libya, getting back to Libya again, Libya is becoming a ground today for all these terrorists coming from sub-Saharan Africa, from the Middle East, and of course they are there assembling, not just for pleasure or for tourism, they are assembling to threaten a country like Tunisia, which we are trying to build a new democratic system for the 21st century. They are trying to get us back, to the 7th century. So there is almost, 14th century difference between what we are doing, trying to do, and what all these terrorists, they are pretending to establish. We are very much aware of these issues. We are trying with the support of our friends. We have very good cooperation with Italy. With Italy, we have concluded in 2011 already a very good agreement, which is, I think, functioning to the satisfaction of the Tunisian as well as to the Italian friends. I just had a discussion with my colleague and friend Angelino, and we expressed our common satisfaction on the way we are handling this kind of issue, because we think there is a common purpose here. I mean, stopping immigration, but helping those immigrants willing to go out of Tunisia or any other of the countries, settling in their own country, giving them opportunities, creating jobs, and of course, helping the states, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, having the right institution in order to prevent such kind of flux of immigrants.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let's move to Niger. Ministro YACOUBOU, Ministro degli Esteri del Niger.
Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Niger. Your country is on the front line in cooperation with Europe in trying to come up with a common approach that we've been talking about so far. Now, Mr. Minister, you were in Abidjan at the Europe-Africa Summit meeting. I'd like to ask you how much progress was made during that summit meeting, but what obstacles still stand in the way of turning all the words we've heard into reality? Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you most sincerely for the quality of this encounter, and thank you that Niger was invited to this dialogue. It's a great pleasure for us to be here, because we are talking about major concerns, and concerns which are common in nature. It is a pleasure for me here to speak about these things in Italy, because with Italy and with the European Union at large, we do have a form of partnership which has worked very well regarding the slowing down the flow of migrants and refugees. So we can consider it possible to do something like that if we do work together and can be successful in the battle against migration and trafficking. Let me just say 2 or 3 things which I consider important. The issue of migration was presented earlier by my colleagues as an old issue affecting any and all human societies. Fine, that's true, and that's the way the world turns. But what is new and is contemporary and creates problems for us is why do young people take the risk of dying to get to another country? That's what's new, and that is what the concern is. How can we do things whereby irregular migration run by organized crime or traffickers can stop? That's what we're fighting against, irregular migration, and that is what affects. Regular migration is what is natural to human society, but to hunt down people, to extort money from them to help them get someplace is wrong. Hence, Niger, as a transit country, are committed to resolving the problem of irregular or illegal migration. A few years ago, about 250 to 300,000 irregular migrants went through Niger. We're now about between 12 and 15,000. So if we divide that figure by 15 or 12, but you cannot reduce that to math or statistics. But people who, I'm talking about people who set out in March illegally. How can we reduce that? How can we come up with sustainable and long-lasting solutions? And you asked me the question if we made any progress in Abidjan. Let me just recall a few considerations which are essential for me in order to understand migration. When you take a look at the Sahel, it is an area where the countries, the states are weak, fragile. But the states themselves, the public institutions themselves, able to produce a governance, to control borders, to manage the aspirations of their peoples are very weak. We had 2 decades of programs with the World Bank, very well structured capacity building and all things like that. Realize that. But one of the first solutions we have to apply to the solution of migration is to capacity building in states. If they become increasingly fragile or set up a parallel system and not consider them, then no state can really handle the issue of migration. No state, no country is able to manage and promote the wealth necessary to tackle the issue. There's an initial thing we have to do together, and that is to capacity building of our states. Take a look at the countries of origin of the migrants. All the migrants you see, they come from countries where there are armed conflicts, where there is no state, where there's extreme poverty, so the state cannot provide public services of a minimum nature for people. So you have to know that one of them first. What's the problem here? He's looking at the clock and says, maybe I should stop. Now, as I was saying, I'd just like to point out that the first thing to do is the reconstruction or the strengthening of the states of origin, the Sahel states. I come from Niger, and I know that this is part of the complexity of the situation. The issue of migration is fearful, but above and beyond refugees, just give me some benchmarks. We realize that some of the poor European countries have received thousands of refugees from Africa, and also refugees that come from the poor parts of Niger, 70,000 coming from Mali due to the war underway in Mali. So there are possibilities to do things whereby this issue could be tackled and solved. So the first point is the frailness of states, so work in order to reinforce and strengthen our state. The second is development. You have to finance and fund development with public aid. Public assistance worth what it is, but direct investments and investment in our countries to produce the services. But if we do not resolve the issue of poverty, no matter what we do, they're going to people who are going to pack their bags and take off. A very simple anecdote in that regard. I accompanied the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, from Germany, became president, to the Noyen Center in Niger. And we listened to young Africans talking about the difficulties which they live, but they said they were ready to return to their home country. And at the end, the German minister and the French minister talk about visa. Nigerian said, Mr. Minister, we don't want visa. We just want to do what we want to do wherever we can do it. That is the situation. Are we capable to go in to become effective and serious in our commitments and produce wealth in our countries? We have a lot of meetings, a lot of promises, but it stays dead letters. The moment when we take the commitment and reality to help young Africans, there's a time lapse. And during that time lapse, you've got the traffickers working and you've got people leaving. Thirdly, I'll go very quickly. I think people should know that in the management of irregular migration, I said that it was a project involving organized crime and traffickers. Well, in the chain, you've got that desert. There are thousands of people who are involved. And we, Nigerians, make a decision to stop irregular traffic. We're creating conditions to consider alternative sources of earnings for these thousands of people who now make money helping traffickers. But if we could set up some sort of special system, which could be a very active system that would create an impact, which create a possibility for a young person to have an alternative economy, so he wouldn't fall into the grips of organized crime or traffickers. Now, all the partners we have, the countries with which we have worked together, have been able to come up with some sort of system or some sort of measure that would apply, that would respond to the situation. Now, question, did we make any progress in Abidjan? Well, we talked about this, fine. And the situation very serious, Libya, etc. And let me just finish with this consideration. The most important thing is value. The persons, no matter what be their color, their origin, or no matter where they are going, we wanted to focus on the dignity of persons. It's not a question of a country or organization, but very often we have been able to tolerate and even work with the devil so that the flow of migrants will be blocked. And when we authorize that, the worst conditions, the worst atrocities were inflicted upon those migrants. So we cannot justify anything. We have to honor dignity. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry if I went too far, too long, but this is what I think. We have to work together, strengthen the state, and then focus on the value and the dignity of the individual. Thank you.
Ministro, grazie Ministro.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. In your talk, you mentioned the distinction between promises, declarations, and facts. After the summit the other day, do we have any hope that there will be facts in this cooperation between Africa and Europe?
C'est une très bonne question.
Well, that's a very good question. Honestly, it's true we should be diplomatic in our work. And quite frankly, I believe we need to do more. And that really mirrors my opinion. We need to be true to our commitments. The OECD countries have stressed the need for solidarity and the promotion of wealth for all, and they have stressed wealth for the promotion of countries. That happened about 40 years ago, and that goal was considered as modest, but it was never achieved. And there's so many efforts within the states, and the current situation is becoming ever more serious. Now, if we don't adopt all the necessary measures, we'll just go on talking about the problem without ever finding a solution. And we shall work on the basis of investment, solidarity, governance, a better distribution of wealth in the world. This is how we can create development. But if there will be no development in Africa, there will be no stability. No stability for the world if one part of the world is left behind. I think we should do better. Thank you.
You are extremely clear in your answer. Lei ha detto che era una ottima domanda.
You said it was an excellent question. And in thanking you, I would like to use this question myself and address it to Deputy Minister Mario GIRO. To the non-Italians, he is known as being very, very factual in his answers, despite his role as a diplomat. Now, we've talked about all these things, and I want to be even clearer. We, from the European standpoint, know that European governments and policies feel that this matter is an urgent matter. The migrant issues is on the agenda for all political parties. It's part of their platforms. And we have talked about fragile states, poverty, need for development. But all this will take years if we're committed, if we have the money, if we provide support. So after everything that Europe has done, now what is the current state of the matter? As usual, be diplomatic. Well, I will be both factual and clear. In Europe, in Africa, if we stand divided on the matter of migrants for electoral reasons, we'll really get nowhere, full stop. Italy, like other European countries, need a common migration policy, a common way of addressing migrations, and the policies should be bipartisan. And this because, as you say, we are confronted with a historical situation. We have some time ahead, but there are some urgent matters. As Minister Massa said clearly, traffickers, the bad globalization is connected to jihadism, terrorism, crime. This is clear. But this urgent need, absolute need for a solution. But as the minister from Niger said, the states need to hold fast. And seen from the south, the issue is not one of security or of integration. From the south, the problem has to do with states that hold strong. Do we want 2, 3, 4 Libyas? And I believe that a state needs to be democratic with human rights are upheld. But first and foremost, we need a state. Without a state, there's really nothing to say about a democracy or freedom. First of all, we need to deal with security. But just think how difficult it is for European countries or African states or states on the southern shore to exchange information between north and south. Traffickers and their partners do exchange information, do exchange intelligence. Drugs come from Latin America. They're unloaded in Western Africa. They cross the Sahel, going by 2 routes, one north to Europe and one south. So drugs go north and weapons come down south. So that's bad globalization. What about good globalization? We've been discussing among states about globalization, but we need to counter certain flows. Abidjan did away with a basic ambiguity, this rhetoric about youth. On the one hand, we have Africans who have said for a long time, we are the young continent. We are the youngest continent of the world. That's what the Latin Americans used to say. And we say we are the Erasmus continent. Well, it's a pity that only 4% of young people go on the Erasmus study stays or traineeships. But young people have changed. Well, there's a message of globalization that tells young people the world is yours, grab it, it's yours. But young people say, well, we don't need any visas, as the Minister for Niger said. Young people have changed, and they're not ready to wait. They vote with their feet, as people say in Africa. They move. And in some cases, it's because they believe they have no future where they are. They know exactly what will happen, apart from a few exceptions. And when refugees, as Filippo said, really create a route, and they follow that route, unfortunately, then we'll have refugees. There's so many people that are entitled, of course, to asylum, but we have people who pave the way, and all the others follow. The world of youth has changed anthropologically. Nowhere in the world do we look young people in the eyes and listen to them. Well, enough with rhetoric. Young people have spoken out quite clearly, and we need to follow. This is something we see in Italy. We complain that young people travel elsewhere. Instead of complaining, we should understand why and how to make our country attractive. And then we also know that on the one hand, the Europeans were happy enough when Italy went its own way. And if Italy blocks everybody, then in the central corridor, they'll be more than happy. But really, we Europeans just cannot answer all questions, especially not can Europe receive all. But that's not the question. The question is, can our society integrate? Or, as in back in the 30s, are we becoming something else? And we know how that ended. And what about the young people who leave their countries? The leaders of the countries of origin of the flows sent everybody out and said, "Oh well, they'll bring remittances back." And the pictures shown by CNN pointed to this. They didn't tell us something we already knew, something we knew in full detail, but they showed everyone, and this was really strong, showed everyone something that symbolically speaks to imagination and points to trafficking. And trafficking is a very delicate matter. Those who believe that Africa is overpopulated, I would like to remind you that Africa will have 25% of the inhabitants of the world, and after 2030, that 25% that it had before trafficking. So this is another important ambiguity. And so it's a shared responsibility, and we just cannot really try to put this away. We need to handle the phenomena. We need to do this wisely. And also, we need to think about development. We've talked so much about development, but it's a very ambiguous term, development. It's a condition. And we need to see to it that Africa produces, full stop. Now, the whole world is thinking about Africa, especially Chinese investments that put Africa center stage. Now, I don't condemn those investments. We must be thankful to China that put the continent center stage and created this backflow. Europe wanted to abandon this old companion with which it shared even languages after a long love story, and decided to say, well, I want to change. No, we saw this clearly in Abidjan. Europeans, African, resemble one another too much to forget. But there's a new history today, and Chinese put this center stage through investments. When we talk about investment, we must see to it that our companies go where they don't want to go. That is the investment plan, the migration compact that Italians wanted. This is in newspaper reporter terms. This government, these policy makers, our government, endowed themselves with an African policy that they didn't have in the past. We've become third in terms of investment. We were 21st we ranked 21 in 2014. So we're very high in terms of investment in Africa. And any 14 business endeavors, all for renewable energy, and in Africa. And then we have a commission, ODA and investments for the public sector. We work hand in hand. So no fence building between NGOs and entrepreneurs and businessmen. Now, this was a good step for Italy. We need to hold firm on this, and we need continuity. And this is a bipartisan attitude. It's good for our economy. There will be more investments. There are sectors where we can provide excellence to Africa, renewable energy. I spoke about that, but SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and our African friend tell us, teach us about SMEs. And this is an age-old experience that we have in Italy. And another area is agribusiness.
Più chiaro di così.
Grazie.
As clear as you can make it. Now, Deputy Minister GIRO reminded us that the real question doesn't have to do with our ability to receive people, but the real question is, are we able to integrate in Italy? Let me just say this. Institutions can receive, but it's always society that integrates. So it's an issue that concerns all citizens. I was getting in that direction there, because in Italy there are increasingly evident positive signs in this area, but one city has been taken as one of the positive symbols of integration, and that is Gaziantep in Turkey. Gaziantep in Turkey, that has received for some 400,000 people without any destabilization and with some very positive economic assistance. Now, I really insisted, and we made it, to have the mayor of the city, who is here with us, and I'd like to give her the floor so she can tell us what they have done in her municipality.
Honorable Ministers, distinguished moderator, distinguished representative, High Commissioner of the United Nations for Refugees, ladies and gentlemen, I salute you with deepest respect. This is a very important event, a very important meeting, convening all Mediterranean countries to discuss migration, and I'm here to give you a good practice example, a best practice from my country. So it is a great pride for me. I've listened to all the ministers attentively, and I saw how pertinent their remarks were for my region, for my city as well. So we experience globalization on the one hand. We are in the age of technology and information, and we have today places, countries with $100,000 per capita gross national income and per capita income. And on the other hand, we have countries where children go hungry and they die because of going hungry for too long. That is why I believe that migration that we struggle with managing today is actually a consequence of all of these greater problems, global problems, because we cannot resolve these root causes. We are now having to deal with the consequence of it. We have to take preventive and correct measures instead of trying to come up with corrective measures. First of all, we need to fight against poverty. If people are suffering from poverty, if people are suffering in regions of conflict, you can never stop migration. You have to ensure and establish social peace, social justice. You have to bring economic development, but also social development. This should be an integral part of all state policies. And just like the minister said, we are struggling with coming up with a strategic plan for the entire world. One country calls them fighters of freedom, the other country calls them foreign fighters. Unless we can change that, we cannot come to a solution. Some parts of the world are enjoying all the benefits of the newest technologies, and on the other hand, people are struggling with meeting their most basic needs. So we need to reconcile that. Let me take a closer look at what my country, my city has been doing. My country has developed its economy threefold in the past decade. I used to be the Minister for Family and Social Policies in Turkey. And that's when I realized truly that we have to ensure social peace, social development, so as to ensure peace across the country. I realized that. And my country is now allocating 36 trillion Turkish liras of budget just to spend for the elderly, for the poor, for those in need. And since 2011, we received close to 3 million Syrians in our country. So the question is, how did we manage that crisis? And you are quite right in wondering how we did do that. 4 years ago, I was elected to be the mayor of Gaziantep. The metropolitan municipality of Gaziantep became my responsibility, with a majority vote, by the way. When I assumed my duties, I worked quite hard on the tourism-related, culture-related infrastructure of Gaziantep, but everybody had one question in their minds. The shared question was how to manage migrant influx from Syria, refugee influx from Syria. So we came up with a strategy with 4 sections: training and education, healthcare, employment, and security. So these were the 4 pillars, if you like, of our strategy. Gaziantep's population is 2 million, and we received 500,000 refugees in our city. So our population grew tremendously all of a sudden. So we, first of all, made a baseline analysis to see what age groups we had, what kind of level of education we had with these people, and tried to figure out ways of how to turn this crisis into an opportunity, how to make them part of our rural development, how to turn discourse, speech into action. And we have more than 100,000 children under the age of 15. When I became the mayor, there were only 3,000 of them which were enrolled in schools. So I'm talking about 120,000 school-age children. Only 3,000 of them were actually enrolled in schools. So we asked the question and we talked to NGOs, we discussed the matter with our ministers, with our President of the Republic, and we took swift action to remediate that. So at the moment, we have 67,000 children enrolled in schools. That's twice the national average, actually, of the rate of enrollment of Syrian children. So 30% of all Syrian children across Turkey are enrolled in schools, and that rate is 67,000 in Gaziantep. So what we had to do to achieve these rates was that we had to increase the number of teachers. We had to build classrooms. No other municipality in Turkey owns schools or hospitals, but Gaziantep municipality has its own school, has its own hospital. If we hadn't done that, many women would not be able to send their children off to school because there were no fathers in most families, because they were dead in the war. And we're talking about 50,000 children who have been born since the conflict, since the refugee influx began. And we started to manage the crisis swiftly and as efficiently as we could. And what we tried to communicate to our own community, local community, was that this is not a choice. We have no choice. This is a responsibility. If we were to close our gates, close our borders, as some other countries did, today hundreds of thousands of children would be dead. And we got great support from our people as well. That was very important. Empathizing with others is very important because we try to put ourselves in others' shoes, and we started an emotional management, if you like, as well. We emphasized healthcare services because for us to be able to treat people with human dignity, we had to ensure that they had access to proper healthcare. Turkish citizens have free healthcare until they are 18 years of age, and we provided the same opportunity to Syrians, and we also implemented very intensive schemes to prevent mothers' deaths. And we tried to integrate them into the local community to prevent parts of the city becoming ghettos, to prevent people, groups of people, increasingly hating each other. So we created a model that was about living together, that was about working together. Of course, we gave priority to our own unemployed people, but we introduced a 10% quota system to incentivize employers to take in more refugees as employees, as workers. Some people were waiting for the conflict to come to an end so that they could actually go back to their countries. They were waiting for that moment to arrive, but as years passed, they realized that they couldn't very soon go back to Syria, so they decided to learn Turkish, and we opened Turkish language courses to these Syrians. So we saw towards the end of this process that they have their strong points, they have their strengths. So we have to turn this into development opportunity, as the minister said. We had people who spoke English, who spoke Arabic, and we integrated them into the workforce. And they have their specialties already, and we included them in the system in Gaziantep. And in the end, we were able to increase and manage life quality of these 500,000 people. In my capacity as the mayor of Gaziantep, when 500,000 people came into the city, that meant need for more accommodation, need for more cleaning, need for more green areas, need for more water, need for more infrastructure. We needed huge amounts of investment, but unfortunately, I'm really sad to say that many of the promises made by the European Union was not met in real life, and we really struggled when it comes to budget management. And I need to thank Japan before you all. I need to express my gratitude to Japan, because they supported us immensely when it comes to helping us figure out how to improve our infrastructure, and they helped us manage our budget. JICA, the Japanese development agency operating in Turkey, helped us a great deal. Water management was vital for us because we started to run, the water started to run scarce, and we created a new model with the Japanese to bring water from 120 kilometers away from a different dam. We had an experience in Jarablus. So we created a safe zone, and thanks to the safe zone, we were able to bring water to Jarablus. So we brought water, we brought electricity to Jarablus, and that zone, that safe zone, was cleared out from Daesh, and people were able to return there. If we want to manage migration, we should not let people lose their homes. We have to put a stop to policies that would make people lose their homes and come up with a global solution. And I would like to propose that, or suggest that we use the model of Gaziantep, the Gaziantep model, and adapt it to at an international level, at an international scale. I thank you very much for your attention.
Molte grazie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor ŞAHIN. And you've...
Grazie a tutti.